stolen. One morning, Rusty could see that Stepney was unhappy, and he decided to find out why. "Excuse me, Stepney," he said, "but it seems to me that things are not well with you, if you forgive me for mentioning it." "You're quite right, Rusty," said Stepney. "All I do is shunt these trucks at the Signet area. I young for a nice run. It's what an engine really needs." "Quite so, Stepney," said Rusty, "but may I suggest you speak to the Fat Controller about your problems?" But Stepney just grew unhappy, and he was rough with the scrap trucks. "You're no good, Stepney. You're too dangerous. We want Henry, Pa. Henry is far too busy to be bothered by the likes of you." And he pumped the scrap trucks hard, and they even came derailed. Scrap was everywhere, all on the floor, spilt. "You silly engine," shouted the yard manager. "It will take a long time to clean up this mess, which will cause confusion and delay." That night, the Fat Controller came to see Stepney at the sheds. "Stepney, you have caused confusion. I thought you could control trucks. You shall work the midnight ballast for a while. Maybe the night air will clear your smoke box." "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir," replied Stepney sadly. "Cheer up, matey," said Rusty. "The midnight ballast runs for a fine engine like you." Stepney smiled at his friend, but he still knew he let everyone down. And with that, Stepney knew Rusty was right. The fresh air had brightened up his spirit as he was racing along the track. Stepney began to enjoy this until it was time to take the ballast to the Signet area. He had just dropped off the ballast to the Signet area, and the workman had put up some nice fresh ballast for the track. Soon Stepney's driving firemen were exhausted. We're just gonna go to the station over there to have a cuppa. We won't be long. Okay, said Stepney, and his driving fireman walked away. But what Stepney didn't know, that he might be heading for trouble. But then Stepney could hear the sound of footsteps. In front of him were some two men in strange-looking outfits. These were the same men that tried to scrap Frank, but Stepney didn't know this. "Hello," they said, pretending to be friendly. "We'd like a ride home. Do you mind if you could take us?" Stepney knew he had to wait for his driver and fireman for their cuppas first. "Sure," said Stepney. "Why not? Just uncouple me from those ballast trucks." And the scrap dealers set off to work. Stepney was uncoupled, and he set off to take the scrap dealers home. But what Stepney didn't know, that the scrap dealers were tricking him, and they were wanting to scrap Stepney and sell him for cheap scrap. Stepney was still not knowing what he was up against, until he hurried along. "Who are you?" he asked the two men, but they didn't answer. Then Stepney remembered Frank's story about when the scrap dealers were about to scrap Frank. Then Stepney's smoke box popped with recognition. "Wait a second," he said. "You're the scrap dealers! Help!" he cried. The scrap dealers are taking me! And they were. Stepney's driver and fireman looked through outside the back window and called the police, but Stepney was still too fast. And then Stepney knew he was heading for trouble. The scrap dealers had stopped Stepney, and before Stepney knew it, he was at the scrap yard. "Oh no," he said, "not this again." And it was. Until then, the scrap dealers were proud of themselves after they came out of Stepney's cab when they heard the sound of police sirens. "Oh dear," they said. "Oh dear," they said. Now look what's over there." And it was. An unseen police car had just approached towards them. The police found the scrap dealers, and they were all in trouble. And at last, the scrap dealers were put under arrest, and the police disappeared. At last, the Fat Controller came to see Stepney immediately. "Thank goodness you weren't scrapped," he said. "I was worried about you." Stepney was happy to be safe, and his driver and fireman were happy to have their engine back. The Fat Controller looked at Stepney kindly. "I'm sorry I was cross with you," he said. "No, sir," said Stepney. "This is all my fault. I was just a bit upset earlier on and didn't know what I was doing." "Let's say no more about it," said the Fat Controller. "You were very brave tonight. From now on, you must always tell me your problems in future." "Thank you, sir," said Stepney. With that, the Fat Controller climbed aboard Stepney, and they both escaped from the scrapyard.